Have you ever found yourself standing in a coffee shop, holding a plastic straw, and suddenly just feeling this crushing weight of guilt about the environment?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you personally are responsible for the melting ice caps just because you wanted an iced latte?
Right.
But
Yeah.
then, I mean, you scroll on your phone and you see some headline about a massive corporation dumping, millions of gallons of toxic waste into a river, and they basically just get a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, it's a wild disconnect.
Right. You get handed all this moral panic, and the actual architects of the destruction just seem to glide right past it.
It really is a profound disconnect. And, it's something that shapes almost every aspect of our lives, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah.
Because that guilt you feel in the coffee shop, it's not an accident. It is the result of a highly specific um, social architecture.
Okay, let's unpack this because we're doing a deep dive today into a really fascinating breakdown. It's a source document called The Architecture of Misplaced Blame,
Yes, it's a brilliant piece.
and it explores exactly this: how moral accountability in our world is systematically rerouted away from the powerful and just dumped onto what the text calls the accessible target.
Which is such a great term for it.
It is. And the core argument here, it completely reframes how we think about morality. Because it suggests that what we call social consensus, like our general agreement on what's right or wrong, it doesn't actually organize around truth.
No, not at all. It organizes around safety.
Right.
And for any social group, I mean, whether that's a family, a local community, or an entire civilization, safety essentially means coherence. It means staying together.
Not rocking the boat.
Exactly, not rocking the boat. Because if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, early humans who challenged the power dynamics of their tribe, well, they risked being cast out.
Which meant certain death, basically.
Right. So preserving the group's power structure, even if it's completely unfair, is this deeply ingrained survival mechanism. And the social system survives today by keeping us distracted. It pushes us to, police and shame each other for minor infractions so that we never actually look up.
So we never look up and challenge the entrenched power structures that are causing the real harm.
Yes, exactly.
But if the system is actively trying to distract us, how exactly does it pull off this magic trick? Like, how does it shift the blame so effectively? Because it feels really natural when it happens.
Well, it relies heavily on that concept you mentioned earlier, the accessible target.
Okay.
You really have to consider the mechanics of how social pressure actually functions in the real world.
Yeah.
Things like shame, ostracism, public criticism. Those tools only work on people who are socially reachable.
Reachable, right.
Like you can yell at your neighbor for using the wrong recycling bin, or you can shame a coworker for saying something out of step. The social friction actually affects them.
Yeah, they feel it.
But you cannot socially shame a multinational corporation.
Right, because they don't have feelings.
Exactly. A corporation has legal teams, PR departments, institutional insulation, and, billions of dollars. They are entirely immune to your interpersonal social pressure.
I was trying to visualize this when I was reading the source, and it's like, okay, imagine a local health inspector shutting down a neighborhood kids' lemonade stand for a missing $10 permit.
Oh, that's a great example.
Right. The kid is crying, the parents are completely embarrassed, there's a whole community debate about following the rules. But right next door, an industrial factory is pumping literal sludge into the local water supply.
Yep.
And the health inspector just ignores it because the factory is, quote, zoned for industrial runoff, and they have a whole team of lobbyists who actually wrote the zoning laws.
That is a perfect illustration of the mechanism.
The mechanism isn't just that the factory is bigger, right? It's that the factory is legally and socially insulated from the rules that govern the lemonade stand.
Yes. The legal and bureaucratic insulation protects the factory. So it leaves the uninsulated individual, the lemonade stand in your example, to absorb all the regulatory anxiety.
Wow.
And what's fascinating is how society justifies this massive discrepancy in its own head. The text calls it proportionality collapse.
Proportionality collapse. What does that mean exactly?
Well, human psychology has this bizarre habit of treating our contribution to harm as a binary switch rather than a sliding scale.
Meaning our brains just categorize something as simply harmful or not harmful, and we just lose the ability to calculate the actual magnitude of the harm?
Precisely. Our cognitive shortcuts sort things into good and bad long before they calculate how bad.
Ah, I see.
So the qualitative difference between, say, person who relies on a contaminated river for drinking water, and the chemical company that is actively dumping the contaminants into that river, that difference gets completely erased.
Because they're both technically participating in the contaminated river system.
Right, so they are judged under the same moral umbrella.
What's really fascinating here is that this cognitive shortcut, it isn't a glitch, is it?
No, it's not.
It is a highly functional tool for systemic self-preservation. Because proportionality collapse, it allows critics to feel morally superior.
Yes, it does.
They get the psychological reward of feeling like they are,
Mm.
doing something by yelling at you for your plastic straw, and they don't have to take on the actual risk of threatening the power structures that they probably rely on themselves.
Because performative accountability is safe,
Mm.
disrupting actual power is dangerous.
Right.
But I think it's important to realize we aren't born doing this. We aren't born with this distorted moral map
Right.
that protects power and punishes vulnerability.
No, we have to learn it somewhere.
We do. We learn this mapping process early on.
And the analysis in the text points directly to our very first classroom for this, which is the dinner table.
Yeah, toxic family dynamics, they were the primary training ground for this exact behavior. Well, in a dysfunctional family unit, harm is usually distributed collectively. There might be emotional volatility, neglect, or just a massive overconsumption of resources by the parents. Everyone in the house is swimming in that environment.
Right, everyone's affected by it.
But accountability rarely lands proportionally on the adults who are actually driving the dysfunction. Instead, it lands almost entirely on the designated scapegoat.
Wait, I'm stuck on this point. I want to look at the practical mechanics of that.
Sure.
Because if a kid in a volatile family throws a plate against the wall or, is constantly acting out at school, they still threw the plate. They're still breaking rules.
Yes, they did.
So how does the family dynamic erase their personal responsibility in that moment?
Well, the child certainly threw the plate, but the text asks us to look at what drives the action. It introduces a concept called proxy blame transfer.
Proxy blame transfer.
Right. In these toxic environments, the child who is acting out is almost always reacting to the underlying dysfunction. They are the symptom, not the source.
Oh.
They might simply be the only person in the house who is refusing to participate in the family's shared denial.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. The adults are generating the ambient tension. But because those abusive or neglectful adults hold the structural authority in the house.
They have the power.
Exactly. And because they have the consensus of the rest of the family backing them up to maintain the peace, the symptom gets punished, and the source remains completely protected.
So the kid is pathologized for doing alone what the whole family is doing collectively.
Yes.
Like the family might collectively drain all the emotional energy in the house, but when the scapegoat child finally snaps from all that pressure, they are labeled the problem.
And that label becomes the family's survival mechanism. Because by focusing all their moral outrage on the child throwing the plate, the adults never have to look at the environment that made the child feel like throwing a plate was their only option.
Which, if you are listening to this right now and you've ever been labeled the problem child or the difficult one in a family or even a workplace.
Oh, workplaces definitely do this too.
Right. Just for pointing out an incredibly obvious structural problem, this is what the text calls the isolation double standard.
Yes.
The act itself didn't change. What changed was your lack of social backing. You were standing outside the consensus, so you became the accessible target.
And we really have to recognize that this dynamic, which starts at the dinner table, it scales up dramatically.
Yeah, it gets much darker.
It scales up to the darkest, most extreme corners of human society, particularly in how we process and view violence.
This is a heavy transition, but it's a crucial one in the text. When we look at sexual violence, we see the ultimate, most devastating example of misallocated accountability.
We really do.
Historically and still routinely today, the moral burden is shifted away from the perpetrator and dumped squarely onto the victim. The survivor of the violence becomes the accessible target.
Because society immediately begins scrutinizing, what she wore, where she was walking, what time of night it was, or how much she had to drink.
Everything except the actual crime.
Right. Meanwhile, the perpetrator, who is very often shielded by institutional power or social standing or group loyalty, is barely interrogated for the actual conscious choice to commit the act of violence.
Yeah.
And this raises an incredibly important question about social mechanics. Why does society continually ask, what could she have done differently?
Yeah.
Instead of asking, why does our culture keep producing people who do this?
Well, according to the deep dive, it's because dissecting the victim's behavior is safe. It doesn't threaten the social arrangement.
Exactly. It redirects the energy of the harm onto the person who was harmed.
Right.
If the community can convince itself that the victim made a, quote, mistake,
Hmm.
then the rest of the community can feel safe. They tell themselves, well, I won't make that mistake, so it won't happen to me.
Which allows the institutions that generate or excuse the violence to remain completely untouched.
Yes.
Yeah.
The social organism is literally protecting itself from accountability by sacrificing the individual.
And we see this profound hypocrisy in the text section on selective ethics of violence, too.
Yes, that's a fascinating part.
Because violence enacted by the state, like war or extreme police force, is usually categorized as defense or maintaining order. Why? Because it has consensus backing.
It has the weight of the institution behind it.
Right. But the exact same physical act, when done by an individual without institutional backing, is categorized as a crime.
And the family setting mirrors this perfectly, too.
How so?
Well, a parent who chronically hits their child for years is often just called strict or old-fashioned by their peers,
Yeah.
right? They have the consensus of parental authority.
Yeah.
But if that child, in a moment of sheer, terrifying desperation, hits back once, suddenly the child is labeled dangerous, out of control, or delinquent.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The moral category of violence isn't actually tied to the harm done. The moral category follows the power.
It does. It is the isolation double standard operating at a macroeconomic and societal level. The state, or the parent, holds the power and the consensus. Therefore, their violence is normalized. But the individual fighting back lacks that consensus, so their reaction is treated as a severe moral failure.
It's a completely upside-down moral map. And we don't just have to look at history or deep family trauma to see this happening. We can map this exact dynamic onto something happening in real time today.
Yes, we can.
The current discourse around artificial intelligence is basically a masterclass in this misdirection.
The AI debate serves as a perfect, modern case study of the accessible target.
Yeah.
And to be clear, the text emphasizes that the structural harms associated with AI are massive and very real.
Absolutely.
The staggering energy consumption required to cool data centers,
Yeah.
the rapid deployment of AI for facial recognition and state surveillance, the structural displacement of global labor,
Yeah.
these are genuine systemic crises.
But let's look at who is actually driving those harms. It's sovereign wealth funds, the Department of Defense, and massive tech monopolies. Yet, the daily public discourse doesn't usually focus on them. Instead, you see, like, a freelancer being publicly shamed on social media for using an AI image generator to make a silly birthday card for their nephew.
Yeah, the dogpiling.
Right. The commenters are swarming this person, telling them they're personally destroying the planet and stealing from artists. Why is the cultural immune system attacking the individual content creator instead of the multi-billion-dollar hedge funds?
Because the individual is reachable. It is the accessible target dynamic functioning flawlessly in the digital age.
Ah.
You cannot socially shame a defense contractor on a social media thread. They do not care.
They don't even see it.
Right. But you can shame a freelancer. You can make them feel terrible. And the profound hypocrisy here is that the critics attacking individual AI users are often doing so from smartphones built with conflict minerals,
Right.
using lithium mined through exploited labor. They drive cars, they eat food from industrial agriculture systems that cause massive deforestation.
The proportionality collapse is just staggering when you look at it that way. Everyone is touching the tainted system, but they single out the newest, most vulnerable participant to bear the sins of the whole structure.
Exactly. AI is simply the current accessible target for our broader societal anxiety about technology and capitalism.
Yeah.
The individual using AI creatively to make a birthday card didn't fund the surveillance contracts.
Yeah.
They didn't build the gigawatt data center. They were entirely downstream of the system.
Right, they're just existing in it.
But the system uses that individual as a heat shield. The individual absorbs the public's critique and anger, leaving the corporations free to operate without facing actual regulation.
So it's performative outrage that actively protects the status quo.
Yes.
So what is driving this on a philosophical level? If this moral map is so completely distorted, why do these critics insist on this rigid standard of zero harm?
That's a great question.
Because there seems to be this cultural obsession where if you touch anything tainted by a system, you are entirely impure. What is the flaw driving this desperate need to be completely untainted?
Well, according to the document, it stems from a sanitized, deeply incomplete cosmology.
Oh.
These critics operate on the assumption that all destruction and all impact is categorically wrong. But the living world simply doesn't operate that way.
Right.
Mother Nature kills. Forests burn to return nutrients to the soil. Our own immune systems kill malignant cells.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There is a concept mentioned in the text called the Kali principle. In mythology, the goddess Kali represents necessary destruction that clears away the dead wood so that transformation can occur.
So we've completely scrubbed out the reality that some destruction is a required part of the natural cycle.
We have. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, there's a massive fundamental difference between Kali destroying what is no longer viable so something new can grow, and a billionaire oligarch clear-cutting a rainforest for pure capital accumulation.
Right. Huge difference.
Both acts involve destruction. But the mechanisms, the intent, and the outcomes are entirely different. The critics demanding zero harm lack this nuanced moral framework.
I see.
Because they cannot distinguish between a necessary natural process and predatory systemic extraction. They just label all participation as evil.
Which leaves us with a really critical question about the human cost of all this. What does this all mean for the people who are actually carrying this misplaced shame?
It's devastating.
Like the scapegoated child who threw the plate, the survivor of violence, the freelancer just trying to navigate a complex modern economy who gets dogpiled online. What happens to a person's psychology when society dumps this massive structural weight onto their individual shoulders?
Well, this moves us from social critique into the raw mechanics of trauma.
Okay.
When a person experiences trauma, especially systemic or family trauma, where the environment itself is unsafe, that trauma cannot be processed in real time. It goes underground.
It hides.
Exactly. And when trauma goes underground, it eventually surfaces as what society labels dysfunctional behavior. This could be compulsion, emotional volatility, or reaching for excess to soothe a profound internal sense of deprivation.
So the behavior isn't the problem itself. The behavior is the trauma desperately trying to find a way out of the body.
Yes. But when society sees that behavior, it doesn't see trauma trying to process. It sees deviance. It sees a broken rule.
Right.
So society shames the behavior. It punishes the person all over again. This creates what the source calls the suppression loop.
The suppression loop.
By punishing the symptom, society adds a brand new layer of trauma on top of the original wound. There is a brilliant summation of this mechanism in the text. It says, you cannot stop a wound from bleeding by telling the wound it's wrong to bleed.
You cannot stop a wound from bleeding by telling it it's wrong to bleed.
Wow. Shaming the symptom just guarantees the person stays trapped in the loop. It's almost diabolical. It really is. It drives the trauma further underground, which creates more internal pressure, which eventually leads to more extreme behavior, which generates more societal shame.
Yeah.
It is a tragic, self-feeding cycle.
Yeah.
And it entirely benefits the power structures because while we are all busy shaming the wounded person for bleeding on the carpet, we are completely ignoring the structural knife that cut them in the first place.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. If all of this, the performative outrage, the proportionality collapse, the scapegoating is just misdirection, what does genuine accountability actually look like?
Genuine accountability requires doing the difficult, unglamorous work of tracing harm back to its actual source, and then scaling the pressure proportionally to the actual power held by that source.
So it's organizing policy and regulatory campaigns against the tech monopolies, building the AI surveillance infrastructure, not yelling at a freelancer online.
Exactly.
It's examining the legal, cultural, and judicial systems that systematically protect predators rather than interrogating a victim's closing choices. It's confronting the adults who built the toxic family dynamic, not punishing the kid who finally reacted to the unbearable pressure of it.
Yes. But confronting power where it actually sits is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
It is risky. The system will push back, often forcefully.
Yeah, they don't want to give up power.
Shaming an accessible individual feels like doing something. It gives you that hit of dopamine and moral superiority, but it leaves the dangerous system exactly where it was.
It's the illusion of justice, which leads us to the most empowering takeaway from this entire exploration. If you are listening to this right now and you've recognized yourself in the scapegoat or the accessible target, there is a profound insight here for you.
The analysis offers an incredibly liberating truth, which is the weight being offered to you is not yours to carry.
I love that.
When society or your family or a social media mob tries to hand you the blame for structural systemic harms, refusing to take that blame isn't irresponsible. It is an act of accurate perception. You are simply recognizing a distorted moral map for what it is. The system wants you to doubt yourself. It wants you focused inward on your own perceived micro-failures so that you never look outward at it.
You do not have to accept the weight of a broken architecture.
No, you don't.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. Think back to that plastic straw we talked about at the beginning, or whatever tiny systemic thing you've been made to feel immense personal guilt over while the actual architects of the problem roll right past you.
Yeah.
If you finally put down that crushing, misplaced weight the system has handed to you,
Yeah.
what could you actually build, heal, or fight for with all that freed up energy?